Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Salesforce Ben LinkedIn Live. So my name is Dana Dar, and I'm the events content producer at Salesforce Ben. And I'm really excited to be your host for today's event, where we're going to show all of you Salesforce admins out there, how to streamline your DevOps processes, all without writing code. So while we wait for everyone to join, let us know where you're logging in from today. We always love to see what a global audience we have attending. So many Salesforce admins face challenges when it comes to managing a comprehensive DevOps process, whether it's limited time, resources, or expertise. We understand the struggles. So that's why we're here today, to equip you with the skills and knowledge that you need to succeed in your career by implementing an efficient change management process. So I'm thrilled to introduce to you Gina Marquez and Matthew Kennedy from Own Company, who are here with us today from their snazzy new studio to share their insights on how to simplify and optimize your DevOps processes. Gina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Gina Marcus. I'm the Director of Enterprise Applications here at Own. I've been at Own for 6 years now, and I was the first admin here. I've been in the ecosystem 10 plus years, Salesforce MVP, user group leader with my friend Matt Kennedy, who is joining me today.
Yeah, Gina, happy to be here today. So my name is Matt Kennedy, Principal Technical Evangelist here at Own. Like Gina, I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem 10 plus years. Been at Own just a little over 7 years, initially as a solutions engineer, but then transitioned to working with partners today. So happy to be on this webinar with you today.
Thank you for joining.
Great, thank you. So before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. So as this is a webinar, all lines are muted, but don't worry, we'll be having a Q&A at the end for you to ask Gina and Matthew any burning questions you may have. So feel free to submit the questions in the comments throughout the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and will be available on our Salesforce Ben LinkedIn and YouTube channel, just in case you need to drop off or would like to share it with your colleagues. Something I just wanted to mention is that you will also want to stay on the lookout for a link in the chat to a raffle where you'll have the chance to win a Sonos Bluetooth speaker, which is worth £150. So exciting stuff. Look out for that. Well, I'll hand it over to you, Gina and Matthew, to take us through the presentation, and I'll see you at the end for the Q&A.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. So I think, when we talk about this, Gina, we really have a lot to cover today. So let's just jump right in. I think when you look at, it'd be great for you to take us through your change management process, gathering information, organizing, prioritizing, through all the challenges with data and testing. So before we celebrate the success of this process, let's go step by step to understand how to tackle this challenge.
Yeah, so I wanted to do this because whether you're in a new job or you've transferred into the Salesforce opportunity at your existing company, or just looking for a new way to track your work. I started at Own 6 years ago with a 34 item backlog. Things like replace application X, move to Lightning, automate lead processes, implement a NetSuite integration. It was extremely overwhelming. And so have you ever felt overwhelmed with just, there's so much work to do, and you just don't know where to begin?
I think, not to interrupt you there, but I remember when you started. We never had an admin before. We were kind of doing a little admin by committee. So we did have a pretty big backlog, and it was great to see you come in and kind of take hold of that.
But with that was a laundry list of items, right? So being an admin of one, I wanted to talk today about how to organize your work, how to structure the changes you'll be making. But before we begin, it's really important to talk about the importance of protecting your Salesforce org.
No, absolutely. I think when, it's just a great point. Anytime, you're undertaking a major digital transformation project, you should really first establish, a clear data protection strategy. Most Salesforce users think that the SaaS provider is responsible for data protection. But as you can see on the slide, it really is a shared responsibility model. When you think about a SaaS provider, they're providing the infrastructure, the uptime, the availability of their platform. And as a user of that platform, you always have access to your data as it exists right now. But think about all the changes that occur on a daily basis. You think about, whether it's just end users making changes, if it's admins, developers deploying code, if it's admins running large integrations. You think about all the ETL tools and all the data that changes on a daily basis. What Own provides is an automated daily backup of all the data, the metadata, the files, the attachments. So you can see what's changed from day to day or week to week or month to month. Oftentimes, somebody runs some type of an integration and doesn't realize there's an issue to a day later. You'll be able to compare and identify exactly what changed. So with data protection addressed, how can we now safely launch a change management process?
Yeah, so let's review what change management is, right? It's how we manage all the changes that are being requested of us. How do we gain business alignment or business approval, especially if you're working in cross-functional projects, cross-functional teams? You want to make sure you have alignment, right? And then most importantly, prioritization. What do we work on first, right? Me being an admin of one in the beginning, I can only accomplish so many things at one time. So you'll need to complete some impact analysis of the work that's being requested of you. And at Own here, we love everyone to innovate. If there's things in our applications that can help people do their jobs better, we welcome those suggestions, and every admin should, as it shows your colleagues that you're a trusted advisor.
I think, admin of one, I think of you as an army of one back then. we did have a lot going on. So it's interesting, as you define that change management process, now it's time to take a stock of where you are today when you're looking through things. First thing is documenting what's being done and how it's getting done. Specifically, if you're new to a job or a process and you have a lot of information to gather, Gina, what would you do first?
So, first thing that I did when I started was interviewing different people in different parts of the organization, how they work, what they actually do, and then how they use Salesforce. There's this concept of SABWA, which is Salesforce Administration by Walking Around. And gathering of information should be never ending. You constantly want to learn what your business is doing. I tell everyone that I'm mentoring, to be a really good admin, you should know what the business is doing. That's where your value is. The technology is kind of the easy part, right? You have a community of people behind you. You have the Trailhead platform. So the tech could be taught, but the business is a little bit difficult.
I think that SABWA concept is interesting. And I do see you walking around a lot, but I think I see a lot more people walking to you. So sometimes maybe it's SABWA is sitting around and learning things.
Sometimes they find me. I think it's new hire orientation. They just
Exactly.
put a picture up and say, go see her. At this point, you're just gathering your workload, right? You want to start some type of backlog or define a backlog if they hand one to you, right? And you want to put some effort into analyzing like how much work it's going to take to actually do those things and put some type of priority around it.
Excellent. So backlog, right? I agree. It's before moving forward with any new initiatives, it's really important to look at all those open requests. As you're gathering the information, you need to optimize, you need to figure out what tools are available and, what you need to track and report on as you're going through all that work. Should you build something in Salesforce for tracking or use a free tool, purchase some tool? Gina, when you take us through like your day-to-day, how do you consume work today?
So starting Own, I quickly built out the case record type for an intake process. I was getting all kinds of requests along with having this backlog of work. And I classified that, right? The tasks, right? A user needs help with something versus here's a big project like implement NetSuite. This helped to keep everything in one place for me. It enabled me to prioritize things very simply. And now we have 3 teams and almost 20 people. So now we've moved to more, formalized processes, formalized tools, purchase tools. But we still use those support cases today for those user tasks. So the point here is you need to start somewhere. If you have nothing yet in place, don't get hung up on the tools, but you do want to start somewhere.
So 3 teams, 20 people, you must just be sitting back and relaxing today, right?
No, it doesn't happen here at Own, unfortunately. In those beginning days, we formed a review board. We had the key stakeholders in the business who would review all the project-related work. And together we would prioritize those items and the business would approve any new requests that came in. Again, going back to any user could ask for something. And this was critical for alignment and making sure that I was working on the right things at the right time for our business. One takeaway here is every year we sat down and did like a 2-day kind of kickoff review. What we were doing, how we were doing it, how were we reporting. And we actually started changing our processes to reflect changes in the business. So you have to evolve just like the business evolves, right? And you must be able to report at least what you're doing, how long it's taking, what's getting done, and the level of effort that it takes.
Okay, so what you're saying is that an intake process should include method for work to get requested. Don't forget those maintenance items, right? There's like 3 releases a year on Salesforce. There's constantly package upgrades from some of the partner packages you're utilizing.
Yeah.
Do a high level impact analysis, right? You want to be able to make sure that you're meeting the cadence to review the work and prioritize those items every 2 weeks, once a month. I don't know. What is your current sprint process?
We do everything 2 weeks. We
2
always
weeks.
have. Yeah.
Okay, important. And then you want to sign off on what was requested. You want to make sure that you're getting done. And it should not, be a requirements gathering meeting, right? You really want to make sure you're being productive. As you're evaluating these requests, what do you recommend to really set your priorities?
So for prioritization, you do have to do some assessment of effort, right? You have to do some impact analysis, and this really should be done before you meet with your business. And that will help you to discuss prioritization. Looking at the chart, you see the work should be balanced between quick wins and major projects, some fill-ins, some maybes. Quick wins really for me should be at the top. They're high impact, low effort, and then kind of mixing everything in the rest, right? When you have projects, you might have deadlines, so that might take a little bit more priority as well. But the important thing is to get your leadership to buy into whatever type of prioritization method you are using. And at this point now, we have all the work collected, we have the work prioritized, so we're ready to go.
I think it's so easy to spend lots of time, right, on those fill-ins. Sometimes you can just get bogged down. You think you're being productive, you're being busy, but you're really making an impact. So that's important to really prioritize. So let's think about it. You've got this intake process. You decided what should be getting done first. And, with that completed, when you think of the method to get started, what do we do next? You got your list. Go ahead, run.
So, people hear the word agile and it's like to agile or not agile. The point here is you don't have to have a formal sprint scrum process, but you can commit to do work in 2 or 1 week sprints. And this is your call based on your business or your business review meeting, right? But the earlier you adopt some type of a process, the better. Here at OWN, that's exactly what we did. Once we had the work prioritized, we would work on those items till the next business meeting. Some things would get finished. Some things were bigger projects. So we would just provide an update on those projects. And we'd also review what new things came in that 2-week period. Remember, you can manage with cases and drive your business review meeting with a really great report or a dashboard.
I think the interesting thing that I saw is as you evolved and developed in this role is that by setting those priorities and agreeing to the business review, then you could say no to some of those requests that would just pop
That's not
up.
my vocabulary, by the way.
I've heard no a lot in a lot of requests that I've put in. But I think, you make a great point. By getting the business to sign off on what has to get done and when, it makes it easier to really prioritize and kind of put off things that may be of that lower value. All right, so we're about halfway through this webinar, and now we can actually talk about getting the work done, right? You've sorted through everything, you've prioritized, you're ready to go. Most things in Salesforce can be done in clicks, right? The flow designer has come a long way since when you started back here in 2018. I think it was probably classic back then, right?
It was classic and not the flow designer it is today.
Not even close. So today we're focusing on the clicks portion of administration and using native tools available to you now. So tell us what you would do.
Yeah, nothing I'm going to review today is code related using Apex. I want to show you native tools. But first, let's talk about data protection and the importance of protecting the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, right, protecting your data is your responsibility. Every SaaS vendor, protects their platform, but they put the responsibility of data protection, on the users. And this is true not just for Salesforce, but ServiceNow, Microsoft Dynamics, really every other SaaS vendor out there. And the burden of shared responsibility goes beyond ensuring business continuity when the data is lost or corrupted. It also extends to securing it against unauthorized access and ensuring compliance with regulations and governance policies.
Yeah, it's really important to protect your data. You don't want to cause a business disruption. And these limitations can also stifle innovation, right? As an example, 90% of the Salesforce developers report that they don't refresh their sandboxes frequently. It takes time and there's effort required. And so they lose out on the ability to have fresh, accurate data for testing, data that could help identify bugs before they get to production. Data could also help reduce the 50% of the time they spend fixing code and redirecting that towards building and innovating and knocking off that backlog.
Yeah, no, I think, and one of the challenges I know that we wrestle with here all the time is sandbox seeding, right? You think about manual sandbox seeding, right? You're wasting a lot of time with CSVs, with Excel, VLOOKUP, data loader, right? And you're just trying to get like a representation of your data in a sandbox, but it's a very manual process with a lot of steps involved. We also think production backups are critical, but what about all those sandboxes? I mean, they really should be protected as well. Think about accidental refresh of a sandbox. If you have a project that's in flight, you could potentially lose some of the work that's being done in there. So the other thing is, when you look at deployments, we think it's really important that backups are done before and after deployments, right? You want to be able to do those comparisons to see what's changed. So our compare utility and own recover allows for both the metadata and the data to be identified between 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, whatever you're looking at. And, lots of those applications store configuration and data objects. Think of something like CPQ.
Right.
You're doing products,
Pricing rules,
price book entries, right?
Yeah.
Those get configured and set up in a sandbox environment and then get deployed to production. Well, if something goes wrong, how do you identify what's been changed as part of that release?
Yes, I can say sandbox seeding is one of the top products that we use here. We use all of our products, but seeding is by far my favorite and most used.
Awesome. All right. So the other critical factor, I think, when you think about sandbox seeding is, our tool will move production data down to a sandbox environment. And I think any customer you talk to, the first thing they say is, well, whoa, be careful there. We got a lot of sensitive information. So there's also the ability to anonymize. You want to be able to mask information that's going from that production environment down to the sandbox. Think of fields like name, address, email, phone number, credit card data, social security information, all highly sensitive information. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing when you're populating those sandboxes is going to mask that information. So when we think about, going through these sandbox types, help me understand how all these work. There's a lot here.
So we always start with sandboxes, right? You're never building in production. So I wanted to just take a minute to explain the sandboxes. First on the list here on this slide is the developer sandbox. And it's intended for development and testing in its own environment, right? It includes a copy of all of your metadata, the configuration. It does come free. You can refresh it every day. It holds about 200 megabyte of data and files. And this is really where you should start. Next is Developer Pro. Now, this is a paid solution. It's intended for development and testing as well in an isolated environment, but it can just hold a larger data set. So you can still refresh it every day, but it holds 1 gig of data. 1 gig of data and 1 gig of files. You can do, more development there, more quality assurance testing, integration testing, etc.
Now you correct me if I'm wrong, but when you started 6 years ago, Were you doing work in Sandbox or was it right in production?
Always in Sandbox. Always Matt in Sandbox.
All right. I'm not sure I remember it quite that way, but
Just don't ask the
okay.
19 of the other people that are now on the team.
All right. Well, and I think that's true of a lot of companies, right? A lot of companies today have developer pro sandboxes, but they may not be using them because of that complicated manual seeding process we talked about earlier. These sandboxes, when you spin them up, great. I got a brand new dev. I got a brand new dev pro. It's got all the configuration data from my production org, but it's empty.
Right.
Now it's up to me to put in some valuable information to test. And if I'm doing these 2-week sprints, I got to be doing that every 2 weeks. That's where I think companies sometimes wrestle with just keeping those sandboxes up to date.
Exactly. Partial sandbox, depending on your edition, is free, right? But it's not anonymized. So you do have to go in and mask some of that data that's in there. It's intended to be used as a testing environment. It includes a copy of all of your org's configuration. However, it only gives you a sample of your production data. And you can identify that by using templates. You could use it for quality assurance testing, user acceptance testing, integration testing, and you can also do some training in there. That can be refreshed every 5 days. And it holds about 5 gig of data and all of your files from your production environment. Yep. And then we move to full sandbox, which again is a paid solution. It's intended to be used for testing as well. But full sandboxes support more performance testing, load testing, and staging. It's a total replica of your production org, all the data, all the metadata, files, attachments, everything. But you can only refresh it every 29 days. So if you're working in 2-week sprints, that might be a little bit of a challenge. But I just also want to note here on sandboxes, there's lots of enhancements coming in the recent releases. There's things like quick clone, quick create. There's some scale testing features, and there's more to come. So please watch your release notes because there's always some things happening here in the sandbox world, which is nice to see.
I see when those release notes, you get so excited. You have to go through all 300 pages of them.
Luckily, they give us the hybrid versions.
All right. So that's a lot of information. Thanks for clarifying all those different sandbox types that are available. Can you walk us through how you'd establish a structure for admins to isolate their work until they're ready to merge into a team testing environment?
Right. So using the native structure, this is kind of what it would look like. You would eliminate that full sandbox if you don't have one. Admin sandboxes, which are the developer sandbox, would be where each admin has an environment. So I would have a sandbox, you would have a sandbox, everybody gets a car. Once everything's tested, those changes get moved into your partial sandbox, and you can have users testing there. You can do some load testing, integration testing. You could document your changes for training. Load testing is really not ideal in partial, so because it is only a subset of your data, but it's better than nothing, right? And as admins, sometimes you hear these terms like promote, deploy, change set. There's lots of things to move changes to sandbox. And there's lots of tools that allow you to do this using code and repository and branches, more formal DevOps processes. But right now we're just focused on just moving that data from sandbox to sandbox.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole another 2 or 3 webinars on all the DevOps process, those tools. There's a lot of third-party apps that are available, right, that can assist with this, both free and paid. And you can research things like Salesforce DevOps Center. It's a good next step. Obviously, everybody in Salesforce says go to Trailhead. Start with there. If you're not sure, see what's available, actually learn the process. I think when somebody looks at this slide, they may go, wow, that's a lot. And you're not saying that you have to do all of this today. You can start with a single admin in a single developer sandbox and then promote to production. And you can add in these layers as the team grows.
Exactly. Salesforce, by the way, is introducing Code Builder, right? Which is now in an IDE environment. It's now browser-based, where Visual Studio is a tool that gets installed locally. It's the newest tool. It'll be a managed package, another managed package we got to upgrade in your production environment. And once you enable it, you can then connect any sandbox to it. And we're focusing here just on basic and simple. Full teams would have multiple developers and admins, QA testers, UAT happening, enablement. You could have a formal Scrum team, Scrum Master, right? Release managers. I'm just really staying focused here on getting kind of back to the basics and just the simple thing, right?
Yeah, and I think the key point is, as you're going through all these different, promotions, there is a lot of moving parts. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and own recover being in place to not just back up to production environment, but all these sandboxes as you're moving through stages of a project. It's important to have those daily snapshots in time.
Yeah, so let's summarize here. If you're following some sort of sprint process, which I hope you are, once you're deployed to production, your partial and your developer sandboxes can be refreshed, reseeded, and anonymized for the next round of changes, right? You really want to focus on making sure your production environment is as close to your sandbox environments as possible as far as the metadata is concerned. And you should also have a refresh process in place, some kind of refresh schedule, right? Document how you're going to refresh your sandboxes and when you're going to do that.
Yeah, as we talked about earlier, if it is a manual process, you're less apt to do it, right? And you're going to go with a month, 2 months. I've heard, some customers with full sandboxes that haven't been refreshed in a year, just because it is so cumbersome to get that done. And I think when you look at like the own recovery utility and getting those daily snapshots, that's where the compare really comes in, because you can identify and isolate what's being changed on a daily basis.
Right. And you could have consultants working in this, sandbox structure, right? And you really need to make sure you know what changes they're making, right? And making sure that your data is protected. So I wanted to touch on testing, right? It's really important to test with real world data. You know what you changed on the metadata side and you know what to test. But it's important if you develop a plan for testing. You want to make sure you're including positive and negative outcomes. If you're touching anything that touches an integration, whether it's upstream, downstream, you really want to do testing with those integrations to make sure that you're not breaking anything. When you're rolling out changes, you want to make sure that your users know how to use your new functionality that you're implementing.
Yeah, I think, testing is critical, but also anytime you're doing any kind of new release, right? You want to get some of those users in to actually test out the application. And we do that all the time. We get the users set up in a sandbox environment. They can add, delete, they can change information. They can run an integration and actually see how the data is going to move. And, getting those power users in a sandbox environment is really important before it goes to production, right? Let's find those issues now before we're actually releasing into our live environment.
I also like to say, you suggested I made this change, so you have to help me test it now.
Deal.
But you may need to help them to, document what they need to test. They're not going to know how you build something, but yes, the end users definitely should be engaged. And another point I want to make here on testing, which often admins might miss, is monitoring, right? Once you deploy a change, you want to make sure if you've deployed something that should be updating data, that data is getting updated the way you intended, right? It's really great to create an exception report. As an example, if you say this field can never be blank, right? Create an exception report, right? And subscribe to it. If the record count is 1, your criteria is it's not blank, boom, you'll get an alert saying, hey, there's something here. You might have missed something when you developed it. It's really important to monitor for the success. The last thing you want to find out is 3 months down the road, someone's like, hey, there's a problem with our data. And then you realize it's because you made a change, right? You don't want to disrupt the business. I'm constantly telling that to admins. You don't want the business to come to you with a problem.
I thought once you release, you're done. You just move on to the next project, no?
Exactly.
All right, so let's celebrate. You've just taken us through. Yeah, you've taken us through a lot of things, right? And as an admin, you do all this work. But you really need to kind of track it, right? You want to look at reports, dashboards, show work that's being, that's waiting, that's being prioritized, that's getting done, right? What are you using to do that today?
So you want to make sure you celebrate your success, right? And you want to measure the process before you implemented it and after. You want to document the changes that you made to any process so you can show what efficiencies have been added or gained, right? You want to capture the hours it takes for you to work on those individual tasks or those projects, right? It helps show that the high effort projects that were delivered, and you can report that monthly, quarterly, whatever that works for you, or create a dashboard. But you want to show what was done, what was added, what's currently in the backlog by the priority. And this all sets you up for your next review meeting with the business, so the process starts all over again. This also helps to identify when you need help. When I need to go to leadership and say, you need to hire another admin because look at all this work and I can't get to it.
I've heard you raise your hand a few times. All right. So you've come a long way in the last 6 years, and, thanks for sharing your experience with us today. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add too, like Trailhead has tons of content on DevOps processes and change management processes. So please leverage that platform.
Are you trying to say I'm behind on my trails? I know
you might be.
Hey guys. Well, thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
No, you're good.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that really insightful presentation, guys. Hopefully everyone attending now feels much better equipped with practical strategies to streamline their DevOps processes. So without further ado, it's now time for our Q&A. So if you have any questions for Gina and Matthew, please feel free to submit them in the comments and we'll try to get around to as many as possible. So let's see what we've got. So how do I convince leadership to allow the time to set up a process for completing work?
That sounds like you.
First, it's you want to try to document the reasons to them of what the value is here. You're going to be able to help prioritize the work, and they're going to be able to help focus you on what's important, right? And having some kind of process, it decreases the chances that the business will be disrupted by problems that you might introduce. Yeah. Hopefully that answers the question.
Sounds good to me.
Wow, thank you. Okay. So I'm a student. How can I download or get a Sandbox or also get first-hand experience with testing, like user testing, other than working on Trailhead, as I'm working on a CPQ certification?
So you can do in your orgs that you get through Trailhead, you can do any testing or come up with a test plan if you're making changes or working on CPQ. You know what changes you made. You want to be able to say, okay, does this meet the criteria that I expected? Write yourself a requirement. I want to create a product with a price of X, and I want this product to not exceed a certain price or a certain quantity. Write that and then test it both ways, a lower quantity, a higher quantity, a lower price, a higher price, and document the results. You want to do a line item for everything you want to test, and also you want to put in your result of everything you test.
I think, back before Trailhead, right, everybody had their own developer org and you did all your testing in there. But as you mentioned with Trailhead, now there's all these playgrounds that are available. So you can spin up a sandbox for CPQ specifically and test out those different scenarios.
Exactly.
Fab, thank you. So do you use cases to track backlog and WIP?
So we currently don't, but at one time we did. And when we built out the case object, we built a child object called project tasks, which helped us for those bigger projects to identify all the things we needed to do. And we put start and end dates and, number of hours and what each task was. So we were able to use cases to do both, right? These are how many cases where users want us to help us with reports, which are really task-based cases. And then here's the 5 projects that we're also working on and all the tasks that are associated and where we are in completion with those projects.
I think which is cool because when you're an army of one like you were, you're using the tools you have available.
Right.
Has that changed today though? Are you using more advanced tools than just cases?
Yeah, we are using paid tools now to
Okay.
manage our whole sprint process with a team of 20, as you can imagine. It's a pretty big team. Right. So we're using more mature tools to help us through that process. But we're still using the case object today for all those, hey, I'm locked out, or hey, I need help.
It's still
in existence.
Serves its purpose, but you've evolved over time.
Exactly.
Okay, nice. So what would be the best built-in tool to do forensic?
Built-in tool to do forensic. So I guess they assume they're talking about changes within the environment. I don't know that there's really a built-in
Built-in
tool,
tool.
right? I mean, you can have reports that you run on a regular basis, but I think in that case, you'd have to export those reports out to Excel and do side-by-side comparisons. There's really nothing
I think when you talk about forensic, if you're talking about like what changes are made,
actually configuration changes.
Yeah, I mean, for us, obviously there's an audit tool in
Mhm.
setup, but for us, it's really, you wouldn't want a tool to be in the platform to to do that, right? Like we use Recover to do compares,
Well,
right?
we
To
always talk
compare our
about that.
metadata.
Because it does sit outside the platform.
Right.
So it's important to have that external resource. But in terms of like just a free tool on the platform, I don't know if there's really, I mean, you have Field Audit Trail.
I would say App Exchange, right? That's another good resource.
Right. There are some free
app,
utilities out there.
yeah,
Right.
go search them. Again, anything you download from the App
Mhm.
Exchange in your sandbox, please. You never want to put those tools in production because you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know how big they are at the time, and you might disrupt your business. So
do the evaluation first, make sure you're comfortable
Right.
with it, and then promote.
right, and
Right.
and using Trailhead
Playgrounds.
orgs, you
Right.
can definitely go install packages there. They do that all the time.
Mhm. Okay, fantastic. Okay, how do you protect your production data from unexpected errors that pop up between the sandbox and prod?
I think it's, this is sort of what we talked about earlier. It's establishing those daily backups. The other thing is, because you're doing a more frequent backup of all the information in your Salesforce environments, as you promote, you can set alerting. You can go in and say, hey, when a certain number of objects or records on an object are added, deleted, changed, whatever, you can get a notification about that. I mean, we talk about sometimes maybe you have an integration with marketing and you're getting all these leads that are coming in from events. And then, that's an integration that's happening on a daily basis. Well, if that integration failed one day and you didn't get any leads, you can have an alert that goes, wait a minute, something's wrong here. We should have had some leads coming in from the website, and it'll identify and notify you to go research why something maybe is not working.
Yeah, agree.
Cool. Can I publish an app over App Exchange as an individual?
I think you need to go through
You
security
got to go
review.
through security, unless it's free, right? I think if you have a smaller app that's free, you can avoid security review. If it's going to be a paid application, you do have to submit to Salesforce and go through a more detailed security review. And there is a cost, I think, for that security review and then the eventual listing. But if it's a free app that you're putting out for the community,
I think there's still some
still a
type
cost?
of review
It's been a while
process
since
around
I
that.
did a free app. Yeah. There's a review process, but there might not be a cost, I think. Right.
I would probably say there's probably something on Trailhead to tell you how to do it.
Did we do a forward-looking statement at the start of this? Safe harbor.
Okay, nice. So how can business requirements be effectively gathered when new to the organization and the project is already underway?
Yeah, so that's a tough one if you have a big project that's in process and you're just starting. And I would say you want to gain as much information as quickly as you can around that project. You want to interview people that are members of that project. You want to ask them how it's going or what what's missing, what are they struggling with. You definitely want to review the requirements and try to understand what's happening. When you start any job, unfortunately, you're going to ask a lot of questions. If you're not asking questions, there's a problem. You should really want to understand what's happening, especially if they're throwing a big project at you, and just ask every question. It may sound stupid, and you can qualify that like, I'm just learning. I just want to understand what this means and how it applies to what the project's focused on.
I've seen you do that all the time. People are coming to you and saying, hey, we need this new field or we need this new report. And you're like, well, why? What's the business purpose? What are you trying to address here? Do we have something already that does that? So I think if a project is already in motion, right now, it's like the car's already heading down the right. You're stepping in. You got to gather as much as you can, but you want to avoid that ready, fire, aim mentality, right? You want to make sure that you're on target, before you get too far along in those projects.
Also, too, if they've recorded any of their requirements gathering sessions, ask for those recordings. Just ask for whatever documentation or recordings are available so that you can get up to speed as quickly as possible.
Okay, cool. So just to follow-up question from the one about publishing an app over App Exchange. Any documentation?
On how to publish an app? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just on the App Exchange, I know there's resources. I think
Yeah.
even just if you Google, how do I publish an app on the Salesforce App Exchange, you should get
Yeah,
detail on that.
100% Google is your friend. I've never published anything, so I couldn't really give you any advice there. But I'm sure if you Google it, Google is definitely your friend.
Right.
When I started, Trailhead didn't exist. So Salesforce was like in my copy. So as soon as I'd pop up Google Salesforce,
Yeah, that's like the
it was
first
like
thing.
Salesforce what?
Right.
So.
Okay, cool. So there are so many tools out there. If I decide to buy, what recommendations do you have?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely a recover tool, right? You need to have a comprehensive backup and recovery tool. I can tell you after being here and actually after experiencing data loss myself, I don't know that I'd want to go to another company that didn't have some type of backup and recovery solution, because it's so important to not disrupt your business. I will recommend whatever third-party app you do purchase, whether it's backup or not, it's important to perform a full proof of concept of that product in your sandbox. The worst thing you want to do is get into a contract with a vendor and find out the tool does not work as you expected it to work, or it's not going to fit your business needs. And now you have to pay for this product that's basically not helpful to you.
No, I completely agree. When I started here, as I mentioned earlier, I was a solution engineer and worked with a lot of prospects. And that's the thing we always recommended is like, I can show you our solution in a demo environment. Everything's going to look great. But how does it work in your actual environment? So install it in the sandbox, actually go through that testing yourself and make sure it's going to work for your particular scenarios.
Right. And I think you can sign up for a free trial on our website, I believe, as well.
Okay, cool. So you talked about your Recover product. Is that something that I can install in my Salesforce org from the App Exchange?
The good thing about that solution is there really is no install. It's an external app, as we mentioned earlier. So if you just go to owndata.com, right up at the top, you can see the ability to log in. If you don't have a login, it'll ask you to start a trial if you wanted to. And when you start a trial, all you're doing is creating a login to the Own portal. And at that point, you can log into your Salesforce Sandbox environment and the backups will start. So literally in 10 or 15 minutes, somebody can get started and go through that evaluation and see how the tool works. And I think what's interesting for most prospects that I speak with that do run a trial of that, once you have that protection in place, once you have that safety net under you, the next time you go to do data load, or the next time you go to do some kind of a mass update, even a multi-edit record on a list view, it's like, oh, it's nice to have that in case I make a mistake. How do I undo that change I just made?
The other thing too is, our product does sit outside of Salesforce. Back in the olden days when I was a little girl, we used to do backups on tape. That was my first job. It was doing backups at night for a company to tape. Right. And those tapes would be stored off-site. So you would never really want your backup solution to be in the environment or even on the same server, that your production data is in.
We've come a long ways. I remember doing tape as well, but
I didn't know what I was doing back then either, which was pretty funny.
I still don't know what I'm doing, so it's okay. But yeah, cloud to cloud, right? You get the Salesforce cloud, all the Own Recover storage is done on AWS or Microsoft Azure. So total separation, even though you can have data centers in the same country, same center for compliance purposes.
Okay, nice. So can we use sandbox seeding to seed metadata?
Metadata? You don't need to, because when you refresh a sandbox, even the developer pros, when you refresh them, Salesforce automatically updates the metadata. You get the latest configuration from the production instance. So
you could restore from it though. If you have a metadata corruption, you go in and
we back up all the metadata.
Right.
You could easily export that and then use the tool if you need to bring it back in.
Yep.
But you were talking about earlier, those 2-week sprints. Let Salesforce do the configuration refresh for you and then use a tool like Sandbox Seeding to update the data. And it really streamlines that process as much as possible.
Right. So I often find myself overwhelmed with managing change requests. Can you suggest some strategies for prioritizing and handling incoming requests efficiently?
Yeah, so I'd go back to that prioritization slide. Like I said, you have to do a little bit of level of effort for that. And I would report those requests up to your leadership, right? There's, I have 50 requests. This is how many hours I think each one is going to take. This is the impact of those requests, right? Like when a user asks you to do something, and this I love. I constantly get requests. I need a checkbox. Well, what do you need that checkbox for? Well, I just want to know if something happens. I'm like, well, when it's not checked, do you know that they didn't just check it, or do you know that they meant to leave it unchecked, right? So why? So really understanding, let the users provide you some type of justification of why I need this change, what it's going to bring to the business, how it's going to help me move the business forward, or help me take 1 hour down to 10 minutes. So the business really should give you some justification of the change they're asking for, what it's going to help them with. And then you can take that to your leaders and say, like, here are all the changes I'm being asked for. I'm confused. I don't know what to work on first. It's okay to say that, right? I've done that. I've gone to my leadership and say, there's this, and this. What takes priority? And they'll say, okay, I want you to do this first, this second, this third, boom. And then it kind of makes those conversations easier once you have all the information. If you just go to your boss and say, I'm being asked the 50 things, your boss is going to be like, okay, well, what? Right. So really having that documented will help you.
I thought that prioritization slide you had with the 4 quadrants, the high impact, low effort, right? You're looking at each of those requests and giving them some weight, some value to them, right? You can't do everything. And I know I've heard you say this often, as a user making a request, don't let them solution for you.
Right.
Like they're saying, I need a checkbox. Well, that's not a request. What is the purpose of that checkbox? Right. And then you decide, maybe it's not a checkbox. Maybe it's a new field. Maybe it's a new value in a drop-down field, right? And don't let the users kind of dictate, hey, this is what the form should look like. Let them give you the business case, and then you figure out the best way to deliver it. Right.
I'm constantly saying, what is the business process? Let me tell you, you need a checkbox.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Okay, cool. So I'm curious about structuring configuration changes to keep orgs in sync. Could you provide tips on how to organize our setup effectively?
So yeah, starting with those developer orgs, you make your changes there. And again, if you have multiple admins, they can have their own, right? They promote those changes to another environment like partial, right? In partial, you would do your testing, right? The same thing, I would have my sandbox promote to partial. You would have your sandbox promote to partial. When you're a smaller team, you should know what each other's working on. Like if I was working on opportunity object, and it was only Matt and I, Matt probably wouldn't. Hey, Gene, I know you're working on opportunities because we work together. We would know what we're doing. When you're a smaller team, you should really be able to what I call divide and conquer, right? Hey, Matt, I've got that reflects cases. There's 5 over here that affects opportunities. I'll take opportunities. You take cases this week, and then you switch it off. It's very helpful if everyone's cross-trained, right? I know what changes you're making on cases. You know what I'm making to opportunities. And then next week you could dive into anything. That's the other thing too, is as the team is growing, when we went from 1 to 2 to 4, right? Everybody worked on everything. And that was important to know kind of what was going on, because it does grow very quickly and you don't want to bump into each other.
Yeah,
so,
I was going to say, if you're starting a brand new sprint, right, you think about, right, we just finished something, we did our release, we did our deployment. And if it's even just you and me with our own developer sandboxes and production, right, everything should be level set from day 1 of that new sprint. So we do a refresh, everything's in sync at that point.
Correct.
Now you start making your changes in my sandbox, your sandbox, I start making my changes. And then as we deploy, production is going to catch up after that release. And then we're refreshing and starting that cycle all over again. So I think it's really important that you're establishing at stage 0 that everything's the same. Right. And then as you're going through the deployment process, you can start to see those changes, go through your testing, get it to production, and start your new cycle.
Yeah. And once the team grows, you start to realize you'll know when at a certain point okay, now we gotta look at some tools
Right.
to help us do this, right? Like
And we
I'm
need
not
to add
saying like
more layers.
everyone should use native tools only, because
Right.
it, that there will be collisions that
Mhm.
happen along the way.
Exactly.
So you have to measure like when it's appropriate to, to start getting some tools. And again, documenting that, right? Saying, hey, we had some struggles this sprint because we were both touching this and this, right? And
Mhm.
a tool would help us and help us move faster, right?
Well,
And
that's the things I've heard sometimes with companies that only have a full sandbox. You could have 10 people in there making changes at the same time, and they could be stepping on each other, or it slows down the refresh because you can't
Right.
refresh. I'm in the middle of a project, even though you need a refresh.
right.
If you have your own sandbox, it really alleviates a lot of those issues.
Exactly.
Cool. So how are you seeding dev sandboxes?
For us, it's sandbox seeding, right?
Today we're using our own tool. It's called Accelerate. And we have, the nice thing about Accelerate is we have templates, right? So we have order to cash templates, we have lead process templates, we have some custom object templates that we have already available. So when those sandboxes get refreshed, we connect them and then we seed them. And the seed happens from our production data into those dev orgs. And the nice thing about those templates is they're automatically going to anonymize any data that they seed from
The
production
environment.
into those environments. The templates hold that anonymization, so we don't have to worry about it.
Right. I think it like we mentioned earlier, if you're manually refreshing those sandboxes, it becomes several hours of work that you got to do every sprint.
Right.
And you're likely not to do it then.
And pulling production like data
Right.
and the relationships, it can get very, very tedious to set up CSVs to do that manually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So when it comes to testing, I'm unsure about which environments to test in and how to approach user testing. So can you elaborate on the different testing environments and the best practices for user testing?
I think before you touch, I just want to say, I think it's important that at that first level, which you don't always think about as a testing level, right? But if a developer, an admin, is working in their own developer pro sandbox, and the data quality is good, they should be able to test before they even deploy to the UAT or the QC environment. So if they have insufficient data, a lot of times their testing is incomplete. They pass something that the QC engineer is going to fail because they didn't have a full data set, right?
Right. Yeah.
So testing really happens in every.
It should. I was going to say my answer is you should be testing in every environment because you don't know what you might hit, and it doesn't hurt, right? You take a few extra minutes of testing, an hour of testing can, surface something that could be a bug that you introduce in production that you don't want to happen. You don't want to have to roll back. So really for us right now, we're testing in every environment. We're using our partial sandbox as our UAT. We have a full sandbox also, but we're using that kind of for special projects. So that sandbox unfortunately doesn't get refreshed as often because we have some bigger things going on in that sandbox. You also can't do that you have every 30 days or 29 days on that sandbox. So we are testing in our partial environment, in our dev environments and in our partial environments, but really testing. And when you get to production, we really didn't even touch on that. Once you deploy to production, you should run some tests immediately or get some users, hold data back so you could do your deployment so then they can use that as their test data just to make sure that everything is okay.
We both said UAT, right? User acceptance testing. I threw out QC, quality control, right? Okay. But I think I can't imagine you writing a complex flow in your developer sandbox and deploying it without running it first, right? You're going to run it. You're going to test several different scenarios to make sure that it works to your acceptance level before the actual users go and try it out, right? And if you do your testing sufficiently enough, it should pass in the next level. But if you do, I tried one thing, it seems to work, let it go.
Here you go, user.
Right.
The other thing to note too is when the users are testing, you should be on a screen share with them. You should be watching how they're using your solution. Because we always
why'd you click on that?
Exactly. We always think it's going to be used one way, and then when it gets in front of a user, it's like, oh, we never thought that they would do that and that or that after that, right? So things happen and requirements do get missed. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. You can spend all the time in the world document requirements, but the user is going to come back and go, oh, I forgot to tell you, I need this too. And those things happen.
But you want to catch that pre-production, whatever possible.
You want to try to, yeah.
Great, thank you. So should we consider a Dev Pro sandbox for QA testing?
You can do QA testing for Dev Pro. It's going to hold more data, and it can be used for that. Again, it's a paid solution.
I think that's the one thing we really didn't cover is, Dev Pros are empty, right? You have to populate them, but you are getting a gig in a Dev Pro, so it's a lot more capacity. I think the challenge sometimes with partial is that it'll be refreshed by Salesforce with data, but you'd have no control over the data that comes in, right? It's going to fill up as much as it can. And I think it's 10,000 records per object or something like that.
Yeah,
if you have more than 10,000, you could potentially wind up with data in a partial sandbox that's incomplete. You may have an account that's missing a contact or an opportunity without the associated account. So the nice thing about a sandbox seeding tool is even with a Dev Pro, you can see the data you want into that gig of space. So you can be very controlled. And if you said, hey, we're doing a Service Cloud implementation and we need case history, you can build out that Dev Pro with just the data you need to do that testing, and the gig will probably be enough.
Right. You don't need leads if you're testing service, right?
Right. So you can be more focused, you can be more prescriptive, and you can make the best use and optimize that 1 gig of space that you have available to you.
Yes, but all environments can be used for testing.
Right, but he was specifically asking as a QC environment. Like if you don't have a partial or a full, you can leverage a Dev Pro, but it takes a little bit of thought and planning up front.
Right.
Okay, cool. So we are coming up to the hour, and those appear to be all the questions we've got. So thank you so much to everyone for attending. We hope you now feel empowered to implement the strategies and techniques discussed today to enhance your DevOps processes. Feel free to connect with Gina and Matthew on LinkedIn if you have any further questions. I'd like to give a massive thank you to Gina and Matthew for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. Before we round up, any final words, guys?
Yeah, for me, the most important thing is just to identify when a process isn't working too, right? Need to shift and make changes. You may need to iterate it a few times. Don't be afraid to make or suggest changes to a process. It really shows that you're invested in your job and you want your company to get the most ROI out of their Salesforce investment.
I just want to thank you for taking the time. This has been educational for me as well. I'm more on the pre-sale side and not the day-to-day admin. I did get my admin certification years ago, but this was very educational for me as well to hear what your process looks like and how you prioritize.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you again to everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar soon.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.